Nested loop. So this is the art of writing a program that has a loop inside of a loop. And I'm going to show you how to do that by working my way through this example here. So our example problem is we get the user to enter a number, and then we're going to get the computer to draw a square, or, well, print out a square with stars. So if they enter a 5, it's going to have a 5 by 5 grid of stars, like the one you can see here in the sample output. Now to solve this problem, I'm going to actually use two loops, a single loop to get the stars going across, and then another loop to get the stars going down, and then we'll put one loop inside of the other, and you'll see how the whole problem gets solved. So to start out, we'll have them enter a number. So let's say n is equal to input, enter a number. And we're going to make it into an integer. Then if I go, S stands for string. So I start out with an empty string. And then for I in range n, so this is going to be a loop that's going to repeat n times. So if they enter a 7, it'll repeat 7 times. I'm going to make my string equal to itself, plus I'm going to add a star to it. And then at the very end, I'm going to print it. Okay, so if they enter a 5, it's going to print a single row of 5 stars. Or if they enter a 22, it's going to print a row of 22 stars. So that does the first part of it. So if they enter a 5, it'll print 5 here. But then I want that to happen 5 times. Now, naively, I could copy this and repeat it 5 times. But the problem is, if the number is not 5, I'm not going to end up with the right number of rows. Okay, let's set that aside for now. So I'm going to put, if you put 3 quotes, it just turns a whole block into a string. I think you'd call that a string. Anyways, what's in green here, the computer cannot see that. So now when they enter a number, I'm going to print, let's print several rows of a single star. So if I go for I in range n, print, and I'm going to print the asterisks. So now if they enter a 5, it's going to print 5 rows of a single star. So the question is, how can I get it to do both of those at once? Not one after the other, because I don't want a row like this and a row like that, but how do I get it to do this within that? And the answer is you put a loop inside of a loop. So each time it does this, instead of printing out a single star, I'll get it to run all of this to print out a row of stars. So instead of printing out that single star, I'm going to get it to make a string, and then we're going to loop n times. We're going to add to that string, and then at the very end, we're going to print that string out. So have a very close look at the indentation. Notice we have a loop inside of a loop here. So for I in range n, it is going to, each time in this loop, it's going to recreate our string, make it blank, and then we're going to have another loop within that loop creating that long string of stars, and then we're going to print it out. But notice this is inside of the outer loop. Now, there's one reason why this is not going to work, and that's I'm using the same letter here and here. You can't use it twice, so I'm going to switch it to J second time. So now if they enter a 5, we get a 5 by 5. or if they enter a 22, we get a 22 by 22. So we have the inner loop making all of these stars and the outer loop making this go here. So I'm going to leave that up here just for a second for you to copy out, and then I think I'd like to make a flow chart explaining how this works. Yeah, so there we go. All right, so let's try and understand what's happening here. So they enter a number, so from the start, they input a number. Now, in a flow chart, typically we use what we call this, a parallelogram for input or output. So we enter n, and n's an integer. And then we have a loop for I in range n. So in my flow chart here, I'm going to have a loop here, and I'm going to just say repeat n times. And what are we going to repeat n times? We're going to make s. So we've got this empty string. And then we're going to repeat another 10 times, or repeat another n times, sorry. And what are we going to repeat here? We're going to add a star to s. Add this to s. So this will repeat 10 times. And then once that's done 10 times, we are inside of a larger loop where we're repeating this 10 times. So let's say n is 5, then it's going to go through from start. We're going to enter n. Let's say that was a 5, so we got to repeat 5 times. What do? We make a string, and then we repeat 5 times, adding a star to a string. So that makes the star longer and longer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've gone around a loop. Then when we get here, we're on our second go, but again, we repeat that 5 times. That makes our second row of stars. And now our third go, we repeat that 5 times. Fourth, 5 times. And our fifth go, we repeat that 5 times. So we end up with 25 stars when the number is a 5. Let me just run this again. So let's say they enter a 5. See how we end up with 25 stars? The inner loop, this is the inner loop here, is what's creating the row of stars, and then the outer loop creates the next row. So we've got I'm just going to resize this so you can see everything at once here. Bear with me. There we go. I want you to be able to see the code, the output, and the flow chart all at once. Okay. Okay, so the first thing we do is, from the start, we ask them to enter n. So this was our code here where it's saying n equals input, enter the number n. And then we convert it to an integer. I didn't really show that here. Now, for I in range n, that's this big outer loop. So we want all of this stuff to happen n times. That's what's going to give us the different rows. And then within that loop, we have for j in range n, and that's the inner loop here. We want this to repeat and repeat and repeat. Each time we do a bigger loop, we're going to go around that inner loop n times. And the reason for that here is that creates our long row. So we have the inner loop to create the row, like the long row, and the outer loop creates the next row. So we call this nested loops. That's a loop inside of a loop. Just hit pause, maybe run that for yourself. And if you do, make sure that one possible source of error here, make sure that that is a single tab. Make sure that's a single tab. That's 2 tabs, and that's 1 tab. 1 tab puts this inside of that loop, and then the double tab here puts this code inside of the loop that's inside of the loop. That's the stuff that gets repeated inside of the repeats.